We never fully understand the mysteries of the human body, but spending a life trying is one well spent. Ross Edgley. Practice is really getting still once I'm in the water. And the reason why this works is because your body wants to go into shock as soon as you're putting yourself in this stressful environment. And by quieting your mind and by telling your nervous system what to do, you're basically saying, hey, no matter how stressful this situation is, I got it and I'm going to handle it. And when we put ourselves in this stress intentionally, we can start training our ability to adapt to stress. And that's really the name of the game, is adaptation. There's many reasons why I get into the cold plunge. And for the purpose of this video, we're going to be focused on one particular phrase called general adaptation syndrome. But before we get into that, let's talk about the author, Ross Edgley. He wrote the book, The World's Fittest Book. And he's actually got another book coming out called The Art of Resilience. And I'll link up the books in the description if you want to go check them out. But I've recently become obsessed with Ross's content and his philosophy, his way of looking at things. And Ross is, for lack of a better term, a travel writer, an adventure athlete. And he goes on these excursions, he goes on these adventures, and he puts himself through these amazing feats, like towing a car while doing a marathon, or doing a triathlon with a 100-pound log tied to his back, or climbing a rope the height of Mount Everest, or even most recently, he swam around the entire island of the UK. 157 days in the water. This dude's absolutely insane, but he's been so inspiring for me. And as I picked up his book and started flipping through his content and digesting his philosophies, what's really rubbed off on me is this term, progressive overload. And it's something that people in the biohacking community talk about, and they use just a different word called hormesis. But the example that Ross uses in his book is going back to this science experiment where there was this endocrinologist who was testing lab rats. And what he was doing is he was giving these lab rats a little bit of poison and gradually increasing how much poison he was giving the rats over time. And eventually, the rats became resistant to the poison. And that resistance built up so much that they were actually able to withstand a lethal dose of this poison, whereas before they had died. So what's the significance of this, and what does it have to do with the cold plunge? Well, stress is the common denominator that allows all adaptation to take place. When I was 21 years old, I had a complete breakdown. And this breakdown happened because of stress. It happened because I didn't have good tools and I didn't really know how to cope with stress. Some of it being emotional, some of it being financial, some of it being spiritual, some of it being physiological. All different types of stress were hitting me at once, and it overloaded my system and I couldn't handle it. My body broke down and I suffered dearly. And I remember going to doctor, and all they would say was, Kyle, like, you're stressed, like you need to calm down. You need to relax. The only problem was I didn't really know how to relax. And my nervous system had gotten so overtaxed over years and years and years of bad habits, bad practices, that I really couldn't cope with stress very well. So the smallest things would set me off. The smallest things would send me into a downward spiral. And I went on this journey trying to figure out, what is stress? How do I quote unquote manage it? How do I handle it? I knew if I found a way to handle stress and to look at stress in a different way, that I could completely change my life. And that sent me on a journey of looking for answers. And for the longest time, I tried minimizing my stress. How did I do that? Well, it started with like, okay, I'm gonna learn how to meditate. I'm gonna develop a practice. Then it was, okay, I'm gonna set up my business in a way so that it is really low stress and I don't have to deal with many of the problems that other business owners deal with. then I'm going to adopt certain philosophies and change my mindset around, what is stress and how stress relates to me. And all these things helped, but there was something that was missing. I kept looking on how can I minimize stress. But the challenge there is there will always be stress in the world. There will always be stress in life. And at a certain point, unless you want to live in a cocoon, unless you want to live in a cave, you're going to have to deal with stress. You're going to have to figure out a way to develop a healthier relationship with stress. And that's when this idea was introduced to me, this idea of hormesis, this idea of progressive overload, this idea of, all right, how do I actually build my body and change my physiology in a way so that I can handle and deal with stress better? And there's so many different rabbit holes that we could go down when it comes to that, but one in particular that has changed my life is the cold plunge, is getting into the cold water. What happens is when we get into the cold plunge, we go into the fight or flight response. It's a very stressful experience, insanely stressful, especially at the temperatures that I'm getting in, 34 degrees, that's nearly freezing. And here's what I realized. In modern day life, we spend so much time indoors. We spend so much time bundled up with our sweaters and our jackets and our sweatpants and in the comfy blankets, all that stuff. And we don't have as much serious threat to our life than we did when we were, let's say cavemen. And so now that we live this sedentary life and there really isn't life or death scenarios happening all the time, and we're not running from jaguars or there aren't poisonous snakes around just biting people, the daily stress that we have is a much more luxurious stress, despite whatever your situation may be. And if we don't work this stress response muscle, then we become weak and we're susceptible to stress. And that's when stress can really be a problem. So yes, we do want to minimize any unnecessary stress in our life. And I'll make different videos about how to do that, but also how can we incrementally improve our tolerance and our resistance to stress. That's exactly why I get into the cold water. That's exactly why I do the sauna. And there's many other ways that we can do that. But the distinction here is about making this a gradual process. We slowly want to turn up the dial, not so much that we freak out our nervous system, right, and make ourselves sick, but just enough so that we can get that acute stress response. And in that moment of stress, we can go inward and we can say, hey, it's time to calm down. It's cool, it's fine, everything's gonna be okay. And that internal dialogue, that discussion that we have with ourselves can change how we respond, and we can also change our breathing, right? So when I get in the cold water, I do box breathing, in through the nostrils 4, hold for 4, out of the mouth for 4, hold for 4. And by doing that, I'm training my stress response to be calm in an extremely stressful environment. There's a Marcus Aurelius quote that goes something like this: "That which rules within, when it is according to nature, will always adapt itself easily to that which is possible and presented to it. For it requires no definite material in moving toward its purpose, but rather certain conditions, and it makes a material for itself out of that which opposes it." I think we could all take a lesson from that, which is maybe just find little ways where we could avoid doing the easy thing. And through seeking something out that holds those attributes, we will be able to start developing a better relationship with stress and better resilience. So inspired by Ross, I've decided to start focusing more of my routines and more of my practices around how can I create this progressive overload where I can train my body to begin to adapt slowly over time. And if you like this content, consider subscribing wherever it is and hit that like button. It really helps out with the YouTube algorithm. I actually started a free group for people who are into biohacking and health and self-optimization. So if you want to join that, click the link below. It's totally free. It will take you to the Facebook group and we'll see you in there. Otherwise, take care. I'll see you in the next video. Be well.